The moment Diana Ashford set her phone down, the restaurant went quiet around her. Not literally. Meridian was doing its usual Tuesday evening business. The murmur of a dozen conversations, the soft percussion of silverware, a child somewhere laughing too loud for the room. But in the particular geography of Diana's attention, the noise folded itself away. Because across the dining room, at a corner table near the frosted glass partition, a man in a slightly too stiff button-down was looking at his daughter the way people look at things they are afraid of losing. She had been watching him for 4 minutes by then. She hadn't intended to watch him at all. She had been watching her phone. 47 unread messages. A board memo she'd already read twice but kept returning to the way you return to a bruise just to confirm it's still there. She had been not eating the seared duck the server had placed in front of her 12 minutes ago, and that was now, she supposed, cooling in a way the kitchen would consider a personal failure. Then the little boy at the man's table said something. She couldn't hear the words from here, but she saw the man's face, the way it opened, completely and without performance, and he laughed. Not the kind of laugh you emit in meetings to indicate approval. The kind that starts somewhere below the ribs and doesn't ask permission first. Diana Ashford had not laughed like that in a long time. She was not entirely certain. If pressed, she could recall the last occasion. She set her phone down, face down, and she stayed very still, and she watched. If this story is already pulling at something in you, hit the like button and subscribe to Quiet Kind, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. He was just a single dad. No one saw him coming. Keep watching. Here is what you need to understand about Marcus Webb before this story goes any further. He was 41 years old. He drove a 2014 Nissan Sentra with a heating element that worked on the driver's side only, which meant that in winter his left hand stayed warm and his right hand did not. And he had learned to live with this the same way he had learned to live with most things, by deciding it was manageable and then managing it. He worked the 4 a.m. shift at Harmon Distribution, a regional warehousing and logistics operation on the industrial edge of the city. He had worked there 6 years. His supervisor, a man named Dale Pruitt who wore the same fleece vest approximately 300 days a year and thought of himself as a straight talker, had once told Marcus that he was the most reliable person in this building, which is great for the building and not always great for you. Marcus had understood exactly what Dale meant. He'd thanked him anyway. He was a widower. His wife Claire had died 18 months ago, on a Wednesday morning in February, of a cardiac event so sudden that the paramedics told him afterward, gently, that there had been nothing to be done. She had been 39 years old. She had been in the middle of making school lunches. She had been, as Marcus had told his daughter Ella in the months that followed, when the right moment came and the words were available, the best person he had ever known. Ella was 11 now. She was quiet in the way that children go quiet when they have absorbed something too large for language and have decided, for the time being, to carry it carefully instead of setting it down. She was gifted in mathematics in a way that startled her teachers mid-semester. She kept a journal she had never shown anyone. She had her mother's eyes, dark and direct, the kind that made you feel, when they found you, that she was reading something in the middle distance just behind your head and deciding what to make of it. Theo was 7. Theo was not quiet. Theo approached the world with the conviction that everything in it had been placed there specifically for him to investigate. And he investigated with the thoroughness of a small, focused scientist who had yet to develop a sense of editorial restraint. He had lost 2 teeth in the past month. He was extremely proud of this. He had negotiated his tooth fairy rate up to $2 per tooth by citing inflation, which Marcus had found simultaneously exasperating and genuinely impressive, the way he found most things Theo did. The 3 of them lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on Carver Street, 3rd floor, the one with the radiator that announced itself every morning at 6, and the kitchen window that looked out over the parking structure next door and caught the light just right in the late afternoon. The way light sometimes does when it's trying to make something beautiful out of ordinary materials and mostly succeeding. Marcus made their lunches the night before. He set 2 alarms, never trusting the first. He knew which inhaler was Theo's backup and which was his primary, and had laminated the emergency action plan himself, because laminating something made it feel like a decision rather than a fear. He knew every substitute teacher at Parkside Elementary and which ones Ella thought were getting the material right. He had learned, in the 18 months since Claire died, to do every single thing that two people are supposed to do together, and to do it without making that the defining story of his life. Because Marcus Webb understood something in the way people understand things that have been earned rather than simply read. His children were watching, not in the self-conscious, performative sense, in a necessary one. Every day that he showed up for the 4 a.m. shift, for the school pickup, for the Thursday dinners that always became more elaborate than he intended, he was demonstrating something about what a person does when the world removes something essential and the morning still comes. He intended to demonstrate something worth seeing. Tonight was a celebration. Ella had come home that afternoon with her first straight-A report card since before her mother died. She had set it on the kitchen counter with the practiced nonchalance of someone who had been rehearsing nonchalance and hadn't quite landed it yet. Marcus had looked at it for a long moment. Then he had looked at her. She had looked back, and whatever she saw in his face made her stop performing and just smile, the way she used to smile before she had reasons to be careful. "Wherever you want for dinner," he told her. "Your call." She had considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. Then she said, "Meridian." Marcus had eaten at Meridian once before, for years ago, for a colleague's going-away dinner. He remembered the bread being excellent and the prices requiring a moment of internal recalibration. The kind of recalibration you do when you discover the distance is further than you thought, but you've already committed to the walk. He checked his bank account that afternoon while Theo was at aftercare. Checked it twice. Then he put on the blue button-down, the one Claire had given him for their 7th anniversary, the one he'd ironed that morning with insufficient patience so that the left collar sat slightly high, not terribly, but enough that he'd know it all evening, and he drove his children to Meridian. Theo had insisted on a clip-on tie, red with small blue anchors. Marcus had no idea where it had come from. He had decided, somewhere around the time Theo turned 4, that the origin stories of clip-on ties were not a battle he intended to fight. They arrived at 6:15. The maitre d', a composed young man who had clearly perfected the art of assessing a situation without letting that assessment show, led them to the corner table near the frosted glass partition without comment. Theo immediately picked up the bread knife and examined it with the focused scrutiny of an appraiser at work. Ella looked around the room with careful, measuring eyes, then looked back at her father. "Good call," Marcus asked. She nodded once. "Good call." Diana Ashford had arrived at Meridian at 6 o'clock. Not because she had planned to. She had planned to go directly from the Ashford Group headquarters, the glass tower on Meridian Avenue, floors 38 through 42, to the penthouse, where she intended to conduct 3 more hours of work before doing whatever version of sleep she was currently managing. The board meeting had ended at 4:47 p.m. It had not gone as she'd planned. Diana had spent 11 months constructing the framework for the Valor acquisition, had built the argument with the precision of something load-bearing, had presented it in the language that left no room for interpretive flexibility. The board had voted 7-4 to table it, pending further review, which was the corporate equivalent of being told your work was interesting in a tone that made interesting sound like a symptom. She had thanked them, gathered her materials, and taken the elevator alone. Standing on the sidewalk in the December air, her company's name etched in brushed steel above the entrance, the city continuing its business in every direction, she had made the decision to eat before going home. Not because she was hungry, because the alternative, the penthouse and its silence, and its unobstructed view of a city that owed her nothing, seemed, on this particular evening, like something she was not yet equipped to walk into. Meridian was 3 blocks away. She had a reservation within 15 minutes of calling. She was seated at the best table, the one with the sight line to the room, without being asked. She had been on her phone since she sat down. This was not unusual. Her phone was the primary instrument through which Diana Ashford engaged with the world. Efficient because she was very good at engaging with things through instruments that maintained appropriate distance. The duck arrived. She didn't notice. The wine arrived. She noticed that. She was composing a response to her general counsel's memo. Measured, precise, the kind of writing that left opponents no clean surface to push against. when the child's laughter cut through the room. Not disruptive, not the kind of noise that earned glances. Just present, the way children's laughter is present. Full and unconsidered, completely unaware of the room's temperature. Diana looked up, from reflex. The boy, 7, maybe 8, 2 visibly absent front teeth, a red clip-on tie that was doing a great deal of structural work, was pointing at something on the menu and saying something that was making his sister laugh too, and their father was watching them both with an expression that Diana did not have a ready category for. Not sentimentality, not performance. Something quieter and more fundamental than either of those things. A man looking at his children the way you look at something you understand, at a level below thought that you are fortunate to have. Diana looked back at her phone. She looked back at them. She looked at her phone. Then the father's phone lit up on the table beside his bread plate. She could see it from here, the notification arriving, the screen brightening. He looked at it the way anyone looks at anything that interrupts, briefly evaluating. Then he turned it face down, not silenced, not set to do not disturb, just turned over and placed back on the table. Gone, like it had never been a consideration. And he looked back at his daughter. "Tell me again," he said. She was too far to hear the words. She read them in the shape of his face, in the slight forward lean of his shoulders, in the way the girl, serious-eyed, holding a small notebook she'd apparently brought to dinner, began explaining something with her hands. Diana looked at her own phone, face up beside her untouched duck. 47 messages had become 53. She set it down, face down. What she watched over the next 40 minutes was not remarkable by any standard that would register in a business review or a profile piece. It was not what most people in that room would have called notable at all. But Diana Ashford had spent 14 years building a company and had developed in that time the particular skill of reading what was actually happening beneath the surface of what appeared to be happening. And what she read at that corner table, beneath the surface of an ordinary Tuesday dinner, was something she did not entirely have the language for. She watched the father help his son cut his food without being asked. Not as a service rendered, not with the deliberate, visible patience of a man performing parenthood, but with the ease of pure reflex. Like breathing. She watched the girl show him something from the notebook, and she watched him study it with the gravity the offer deserved. Not the distracted encouragement of a man waiting to say something kind, but the actual attention of someone who was genuinely interested in what he was being shown. She watched the boy say something that was apparently the funniest thing anyone in the history of Meridian had ever said, and she watched the father laugh again. That laugh, the one for below the ribs, the one that surprised the person doing it. And then the girl was laughing too, and for a few seconds all three of them were sealed inside their own world entirely, the rest of the room irrelevant. She noticed the moment a young server, carrying 2 plates back from a nearby table, caught the edge of a chair leg and stumbled. The plates didn't fall. She caught them, barely, with a sharp intake of breath, but her face went immediately red in the particular way of someone who has just done something visible in a room full of people who noticed. The restaurant registered it briefly and returned to itself. Most tables looked away with the polite efficiency of people who have decided the incident is not their concern. The father was mid-sentence. He didn't stop, but his eyes moved to the server for a fraction of a second, and he caught her gaze, and the look he gave her, unhurried, clean of pity, a single small nod that communicated "you're fine" in the specific language of someone who knows what it is to recover from something in front of an audience, made the server's shoulders drop 3 inches in relief. She gave him a small, grateful look. He was already looking back at his kids. He didn't comment on it, didn't point it out to Ella or Theo, didn't let it become a moment about him. He just did it, and let it be done. Diana looked at her duck, which was now past saving. She looked at the table across the room. She looked at the space in the middle distance between them and thought about 14 years of knowing exactly what to do in any given room, and about the specific quality of attention this man had just given a server who dropped 2 plates, which was nothing, which was the simplest possible human thing, which she was quite certain she had not done for anyone in longer than she could name. The father said something that made his daughter shake her head, disagreeing, and he listened to her disagreement with the open expression of a man who genuinely does not mind being wrong. The boy leaned sideways in his chair and knocked his fork off the table. It clattered to the floor. He looked up at his father with a round-eyed assessment of a child reading the temperature of the room. The father picked up the fork, set it on the bread plate, and caught a passing server's eye with a small gesture. That was all. No apology. No embarrassment performed for the room. Just, this happened, and here's what we do. Diana Ashford's phone buzzed, face down, on the tablecloth. She left it there. She had been building toward a decision for 20 minutes by then. Or perhaps she had already made it, and the 20 minutes had simply been the time required for the rest of her to catch up. She was not a person who acted without data. But the data available to her was the following. A man had spent the last 40 minutes in a restaurant, with his children fully present, without a single performance of it, without a single moment of looking around to see if anyone was watching. He had laughed with his whole face. He had listened with his whole attention. He had helped the stumbling server with his eyes and nothing else, and then let it go entirely, like it was the smallest possible thing, which it was, and somehow also wasn't. She stood up. Her chair made the faint sound of chair legs on tile, and the nearby tables registered it without concern. She crossed the room. She stopped at the edge of their table. The boy saw her first. He looked up with the frank, direct curiosity of a 7-year-old confronted with an adult who has no obvious function in the current situation. He tilted his head slightly, still holding his knife. The girl looked up a moment later, more measured, with those dark and careful eyes that didn't immediately show what they were thinking. The father looked up last, the way people look up when they have been genuinely somewhere else and are returning to the room. He looked at her with the polite readiness of a man waiting to understand what this was. He didn't know who she was. She could see that plainly. There was no flicker of recognition, no shift in posture. He was simply a man at dinner with his children, looking at a stranger who had stopped at their table, giving her the same unhurried patience he had given everything else this evening. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Diana said. She was aware, in some small observing part of herself, that she could not recall the last time she had said those words and entirely meant them. "I've been sitting across the room," she said. "I watched you with your kids tonight." She stopped. She did not have the rest of the sentence ready, which was not characteristic. I wanted to say that it was something worth seeing. She had not planned those words. They were simply the most accurate ones available, so they arrived. The father looked at her. A beat of silence, the particular quiet of a person who is not filling it out of discomfort, who is simply letting the moment be what it is. Then he said, "Thank you," not deflecting it, not making it smaller than it was, not false modesty or unnecessary performance. Just, "Thank you," the way you accept something given honestly. The girl was studying Diana with those careful eyes, the ones that were measuring something. The boy had apparently determined that this interruption was of limited relevance to his current interests and had returned his attention to the breadbasket. "Theo," the girl said, in the precise register of an older sibling who has perfected the single-word correction. The father's gaze traveled briefly toward the ceiling, the look of a man who has made his peace with the distance between hope and outcome, and then came back to Diana with a question forming behind his expression. "Would you like to sit down?" he asked. Diana Ashford had not accepted a spontaneous invitation from a stranger in longer than she could name. She made choices from position, from information, from the careful mapping of what a thing would cost and what it would return. She had built a $3 billion company on the discipline of knowing precisely what she was walking into before she walked into it. She pulled out the empty chair. She sat down. The restaurant continued its Tuesday evening around them. No one noticed. No one would have thought to. A woman in a gray wool coat had joined a family for dinner. That was all. That was everything. The bread was warm. The boy was already negotiating for a second basket. And somewhere between the frosted glass partition and the corner table, something had shifted in the room that neither of them had the words for yet, but that both of them, in their different ways, had been waiting for longer than they knew. Theo looked at her for approximately 4 seconds with the frank, unhurried assessment that 7-year-olds deploy when they have decided to take something seriously. Then he said, "Do you have kids?" "Theo," Marcus said. "What?" "I'm just asking." She just sat down. "I know. I saw her sit down." Theo turned back to Diana with the expression of a man whose line of inquiry had been interrupted but not abandoned. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Diana looked at him. The clip-on tie had migrated slightly to the left over the course of the evening, giving him the look of a small executive who had survived a difficult merger. No, she said. I don't have kids. He nodded once, processing this. That's okay, he said, with the tone of someone extending genuine consolation. Then he reached for the breadbasket, satisfied with the exchange. Marcus looked at Diana. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite an apology, but was the territory adjacent to it. He's very direct. I can see that. She paused. I appreciate it, actually. And she meant it, which surprised her slightly. Ella had been watching Diana with those measured dark eyes since she sat down, the way she watched anything new, not unfriendly, just gathering data before she committed to a position. She set her notebook on the table between them, a specific deliberateness to the gesture, and said, "What do you do?" Marcus started to say something. Ella's eyes moved to him briefly. "I've got this, Dad," and back to Diana. "I run a company," Diana said. "What kind?" "Technology. Software, mostly. Tools that help other businesses manage their operations." Ella considered this. "Do you like it?" Diana opened her mouth, closed it. It was such a simple question, the kind you stopped being asked somewhere around the time people started addressing you by your title, that she found herself genuinely searching for an honest answer rather than a reflexive one. "Most days," she said finally. Today was not most days. Ella nodded, as though this was a perfectly reasonable thing to say about work. "My mom used to say that every job has a Tuesday," she said. "Even the good ones." Something in the room went still for a moment. The particular stillness that arrives when a child says something with the unaware precision of someone who doesn't yet know how well aimed it is. Marcus looked at his daughter with an expression Diana would think about later, in the car, sitting in the parking structure waiting for the engine to warm. It was not grief. It was something more complicated than grief, something that had been carried so long it had become structural, like a beam you forgot was there until the light caught it at a certain angle. "Your mom sounds like she was smart," Diana said. "She was," Ella said simply. "She died." "I know. I'm sorry." Ella looked at her, assessing the apology with those careful eyes. Then she gave a small nod that said, "Accepted, and we don't have to dwell." She picked up her pen and opened the notebook to a page of neat, small handwriting, and resumed whatever she'd been working on before Diana arrived. The matter was settled. Marcus exhaled quietly. He looked at Diana with the look of a man who has been navigated by his children in public before and has long stopped being surprised by how often they do it better than he would have. "She's something," Diana said low. "She really is," Marcus said. No false modesty. No performance of humility. Just truth, spoken plainly by a man who had been paying attention. They stayed at the table for another 40 minutes after that. The plates were cleared. Theo negotiated the terms of a dessert with the focused energy of someone who had come prepared with supporting arguments and was prepared to go to arbitration, if necessary. Ella showed Marcus something in her notebook, a proof. It looked like several lines of careful working out, and he studied it with genuine attention, asking 2 questions that made her correct him, which she did without ceremony. Diana ordered coffee and didn't check her phone. This was not a decision she made consciously. She simply didn't reach for it. At some point, she would not have been able to say exactly when, the conversation stopped being between her and Marcus and started being between all 4 of them. Theo explained, at considerable length, the geopolitical complexity of his classroom's eraser sharing system, which had recently collapsed under its own contradictions. Ella disputed several of his facts with the sighing patience of someone who has resigned herself to being accurate in a world that is often not. Marcus arbitrated without picking sides, which Diana recognized as a particular skill, rarer than people acknowledged. She talked less than the rest of them. She listened more than she usually did in rooms where she was the most important person present. It occurred to her somewhere around the second cup of coffee that she was not, at this table, the most important person present, and that this did not feel like a deficit. "What do you do for fun?" Theo asked her, with the abruptness of someone who had been saving this question. Diana thought about it honestly. "I work." He blinked. That's it. Mostly. He looked at his father. His father looked at the ceiling briefly. The ceiling had been very useful to him this evening. Then Theo turned back to Diana with the expression of someone who has made a difficult determination. You should get a hobby, he said. Dad does woodworking on weekends. He made our bookshelf. It wobbles a little on the left side, but he says that gives it personality. I said character, Marcus said. You said personality. Character. Dad. Theo. Ella did not look up from her notebook. It wobbles, she confirmed. Underscore. If this story has found its way to you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Quiet Kind. Your support is what keeps these stories coming, and there are so many more waiting to be told. They were getting ready to leave when Marcus excused himself briefly, heading toward the back of the restaurant. Theo had Ella's phone by then, permitted under whatever negotiated terms existed between the two of them, and was engaged with something on the screen with the intensity of a person who had been waiting for this opportunity all evening. Ella was finishing a sentence in her notebook, pressing down hard on the final word with the satisfaction of someone closing a case. Diana sat with the empty coffee cup and the quiet of a table winding down and did something she had not done in a long time. She simply sat. No phone, no memo forming in the back of her mind, no running calculation of what the next hour required. She just sat in the particular warmth of a corner table in a restaurant on a Tuesday evening and felt the strange, unfamiliar weight of an hour she had not been in charge of. She had not planned to stay. She had not planned any of this. She had crossed a room toward a stranger's table with half a sentence ready and had somehow stayed for dessert. Her phone, in her coat pocket, was buzzing with the irregular frequency of multiple arriving messages. She was aware of this the way you are aware of a sound in another room. Present, noted, not yet relevant. When Marcus came back to the table, he stopped. His hand rested on the back of his chair for a moment, and he looked at Diana with an expression that was measured and quiet. You paid the bill, he said. Not an accusation. A statement delivered in the flat, careful tone of a man determining what a thing means before deciding what to do with it. Diana looked at him evenly. I did. I had it. I know. He stood there for a moment, his hand on the chair back, and she could see him working through it. Not the money, she understood, but the thing underneath the money. The question of what it meant that she'd done it, and what it said about what she'd assumed, and whether he was going to let it mean that. She said, carefully, tonight was worth celebrating. Ella's report card is worth celebrating. That's all it is. He looked at her for another beat. Then something in his shoulders settled. Not submission, not gratitude exactly. More like a man deciding that a thing is what it appears to be, and that he doesn't have to make it more complicated than that. Thank you, he said, the same way he'd said it when she first sat down. Direct, without performance. She nodded once. They gathered their coats. Theo had been unusually quiet for the past 3 minutes, which was notable because Theo was almost never quiet, and the silence had the specific quality of a child who has discovered something and is deciding the right moment to surface it. Ella noticed first, the way older siblings always notice. She looked at her brother with narrowed eyes. What are you doing? Nothing. Theo. I'm just reading. Reading what? He held up the phone. On the screen, a news article. Small photo at the top. A woman in a dark blazer at a podium, speaking to a room. The headline visible above the fold. Ashford Group's Victoria, no. Diana Ashford named to Forbes Billionaire's list for 3rd consecutive year. Ella's eyes moved from the screen to Diana and back to the screen. The careful, quiet expression on her face shifted, not dramatically. Like a photograph coming into focus. Theo tilted the phone toward his father. Marcus took it. Read it. He was a deliberate reader. He didn't skim, the way people skim things when they're looking for the part that confirms what they already think. He read it all the way through. The photo, the headline, the first 3 lines, the net worth figure printed in the 3rd paragraph, the kind of number that sits on the page the way certain facts sit, plainly, without comment, expecting nothing from you. He went very still. Then he looked up. Diana was watching him read. She had known the moment was coming, had felt it arriving from the time Theo went quiet. And she had not, she realized, made any move to prevent it. She had not excused herself, had not redirected the conversation, had not done any of the things she would normally do by instinct to control the shape of how and when and in what context people learned who she was. She had just stayed at the table and waited. Marcus's eyes found hers over the top of Theo's phone. He held her gaze with the same unhurried steadiness he had brought to everything else this evening. The dropped fork, the stumbling server, the bill he hadn't wanted paid. The same patience, the same willingness to let a thing be what it was before deciding what to do with it. Diana Ashford, he said, quietly. Not a question. Yes. He set the phone down on the table between them. His hand stayed rested on it for a moment, and then he pulled it back. Ella was still watching Diana. Those dark, careful eyes, reading the middle distance behind her head the way they always did. Then Ella said, with the disarming simplicity of a child who has already decided that complicated things don't need to be made more complicated, "Is that why you were eating alone?" Diana looked at her. Something moved through her chest. Not sharply, but with the dull, sustained pressure of something that had been true for a long time and was only now being said out loud in a form she couldn't argue with. "Yes," Diana said. "I think that's part of it." Ella nodded, as though this made sense, as though it was the most reasonable answer available. She picked up her notebook and tucked it into her bag with the focused care of someone preserving something important. Theo retrieved his clip-on tie, which had finally detached entirely sometime during dessert, and put it in his coat pocket with the solemnity of a retired soldier folding a flag. Marcus stood and looked at Diana Ashford, CO, Billionaire, the woman who had been watching him from across a restaurant, with an expression that was not awe and not suspicion, and not the particular kind of careful friendliness that people extended to people with their kind of money. It was something simpler and more honest than any of those things. "My car's in a structure on 4th, he said. "If you're walking that direction." Diana looked at him for a moment. "I am," she said. The parking structure on 4th Street was 3 blocks from Meridian. In December, at 8 in the evening, 3 blocks is an honest distance. Theo walked between them with the unhurried confidence of a child who has decided that the current arrangement makes sense and requires no further analysis. He had retrieved the clip-on tie from his coat pocket and was wearing it again, for reasons he did not explain. Ella walked on Marcus's other side, her notebook tucked under her arm, occasionally glancing at Diana with those measured, quiet eyes. Not suspicion, not fascination exactly. More the look of someone cross-referencing new information against an existing map and finding that the map needs updating. Diana had her hands in her coat pockets. The cold was the particular cold of early December, clean and without negotiation. She had been in taxis and town cars and climate-controlled offices for most of the past 14 years, and had developed, she was realizing, almost no tolerance for being simply outside in weather. "You're not dressed for this," Marcus said. Not unkindly, just observationally. "I walk from the office. I underestimated the distance. That happens. Not usually to me." He glanced at her, something at the corner of his mouth. "What usually happens to you?" She thought about it honestly. "I have someone manage the distance." He absorbed this without comment. Theo had found a stretch of sidewalk with a thin glaze of ice on it, and was testing it carefully with one foot in the manner of a scientist confirming a hypothesis. Marcus watched him from the corner of his eye, not hovering, just the particular low-frequency alertness of a parent who has learned to be aware without being present in a way that changes behavior. "The board meeting," Diana said. She hadn't planned to say it. "This afternoon. It didn't go the way I needed it to. I'm sorry. 11 months, she said, on one acquisition, and they voted to table it." She said it the way she would have said it to her general counsel or her communications director, flat, precise, contained. And then she heard how it sounded, and something loosened in it, just slightly. I keep thinking about what I missed. What argument I didn't make. Which board member I didn't bring around in time. Marcus walked beside her. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't reframe it or tell her what he would have done differently or suggest that the board might come around. He just walked and listened with the full, unhurried attention she had watched him give everything else this evening. What would you have done with it, he asked. The acquisition. She told him. Not the boardroom version, the version underneath that one, the one that had made her care about it in the first place. The actual idea. What Valor's infrastructure could become, what she had seen in it that the board had looked at and only seen the risk. She talked for a full city block, and Marcus listened and asked one question that was so precise it stopped her mid-sentence. That's exactly it, she said, looking at him. That's the part one didn't say clearly enough. He shrugged once, the modest shrug of a man who has handed someone the right tool without particularly intending to. It seemed like the center of it. She looked at him for a moment in the cold December air. The center of it. 11 months and a 7-4 vote and a duck she hadn't eaten. And a man who had spent his career moving freight in a warehouse had identified the center of it in 40 words on a sidewalk. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? She considered being diplomatic. She decided against it. I'm not sure I was expecting anything. I think that was the problem. He glanced at her, and in the light from the street lamp his expression was the same open, undefended thing it had been all evening. Most people aren't, he said. Expecting, I mean. They think they are. A pause. Claire used to say I was too willing to take people at face value. I used to think that was a criticism. It wasn't. No. He said it simply. It was just an observation. She observed things very clearly. He was quiet for a moment. I missed that, actually. Having someone around who observes things clearly. Ella, walking on his other side, slipped her hand into his without ceremony or comment. The practiced, unremarkable gesture of a child who has been paying attention to a conversation she appeared to be ignoring, and had heard something that required a response she didn't have words for yet. Marcus closed his hand around hers. They walked the rest of the block like that. Underscore. Diana called 3 weeks later. Not her assistant, not a member of her team. Diana, from her own number at 7:30 on a Thursday morning. Marcus was packing Theo's lunch when the phone rang. He almost didn't answer an unknown number. He answered. I wanted to know how the next test went, Diana said, without preamble. Ellis. She mentioned she had a geometry exam. Marcus set down the sandwich he'd been making. He looked at the phone in his hand for a moment, then put it back to his ear. 802, he said. Bonus question. A pause. Then, quietly, good. Another pause, shorter. I'm glad. She sounded, he thought, like someone who genuinely was. They talked for 12 minutes, standing in his kitchen while Theo ate cereal across the counter with focused dedication. Not about business, not about what she had or who she was. About Ella's geometry teacher, who she thought was underestimating her. About a bookshelf Marcus was building on weekends, an actual one this time, he told her, with a level. About whether the wobble in the first one was really character, which Diana said it was not, with the directness he was beginning to recognize as just how she spoke when she wasn't in a room where she had to be careful. They met for coffee twice in January. Pauline's, on the corner of Reedwood and Fifth. Her suggestion, which he took as something. On the third meeting, in the booth by the window, with 2 coffees between them and the February light lying flat across the table. Diana set both hands on the surface, a gesture he would later learn was something she did when she was not hiding anything, and told him what she wanted to offer him. She was building a logistics arm for a new Ashford initiative. Distribution infrastructure, supplier coordination, operational oversight. She needed someone who understood systems from the inside, not from a spreadsheet, but from underneath a vehicle in a warehouse parking lot at 4 a.m., which was where systems either worked or they didn't. She had watched him work a room without knowing he was working it. She told him. She knew what that looked like. She needed it in a director of operations, and she had not, in 11 months of looking, found it in anyone who had applied for the role. Marcus sat with this for a long time, long enough that Gloria refilled both coffees and left again without comment. "Is this because you feel like you owe me something?" he asked. Diana looked at him steadily. "No, because I know you don't." She said it without impatience. "That's part of why I'm asking." He was quiet for another moment. Outside, the last of the February snow was doing its slow work on the sidewalk. He thought about the 4 a.m. shift, about Dale Pruitt's fleece vest, about the heating element on the driver's side of his car that kept one hand warm all winter and left the other to manage on its own. He thought about Ella's geometry exam and the way Diana had said, "I'm glad" on a Thursday morning, like she meant it and wasn't particularly interested in managing how that sounded. "I need to think about it," he said. "I know. A week. Take 2. He took 1. Understood. The call Marcus made to Dale Pruitt on a Monday morning in the second week of February was brief. Dale was quiet through most of it, in a way that certain people go quiet when something is larger than the available response. Then he said, "You were always too good for this building." And then, after a pause that had considerable feeling in it, "I told you that. You said I was the most reliable person in the building," Marcus said. "That's what I said," Dale confirmed. "It's not what I meant." The people at Harmon Distribution who had treated Marcus as background, who had walked past his workstation, who had forgotten his name in interdepartmental emails, who had once scheduled a logistics review meeting and not included the person who knew the logistics best, learn about his new position the way people learn about things they should have seen coming, all at once, publicly, with no available reaction that didn't cost them something. There was no confrontation, no speech, no moment of public reckoning performed for an audience. Just the quiet, specific weight of having been wrong about a person for a very long time and having to carry that forward. Marcus sent Dale a bottle of the good bourbon, no note. Dale understood. Underscore 3 months after a Tuesday evening at Meridian, Diana Ashford walked back into a board meeting. Same room, same table, same 7-4 split on the Valor acquisition. Except that this time, she had rebuilt the argument from the center outward, starting from the part she hadn't said clearly enough. The part a man on a sidewalk had identified in 40 words. The vote came back 6-5 in favor. Her general counsel, Bernard Ashworth, a careful man who had worked with Diana for 9 years and knew the difference between when she had changed her mind and when she had changed her approach, asked her afterward where the revision had come from. "Conversation," she said. He waited for more. She didn't offer it. He wrote in his notes anyway, because he recognized the look on her face, which was the look of someone who has been handed a correct. Here's what Ella said. It was a Saturday evening in March, and Marcus was getting ready to have dinner with Diana. Not at Meridian, somewhere smaller, the kind of place you go when you're not trying to prove anything. He was standing in the hallway, putting on his coat, the good one, not the one he wore to the warehouse. Ella was on the couch with her notebook, doing what she always did with her notebook, working something out with the careful precision of a person who takes the work seriously. She didn't look up when she said it. "She looks at you the way you look at us," Ella said. Marcus stopped. His hand was on the top button of the coat. He stood in the hallway for a moment, not quite still, not quite moving. "Ella, I'm just telling you what I see." She turned a page in the notebook. "You always say I should say what I see." He stood there for a little longer. Then he said, quietly, "Yeah, I do say that." Theo emerged from the hallway bathroom with his toothbrush, paused to take in the situation, and rendered his verdict without being asked. "She's nice." She said the wobble was character. I thought she said it wasn't character. She changed her mind. Theo returned to the bathroom. People can do that. Marcus finished buttoning the coat. He stood for a moment in the hallway of the apartment on Carver Street, the one with the radiator that clanked every morning at 6 and the kitchen window that caught the light in the late afternoon and made something beautiful out of ordinary materials. He thought about Claire, the way she observed things clearly, the way she had said once that the people you least expect to need something are often the ones who need it most. They've just gotten very good at not asking. He thought about a woman who had sat alone in a restaurant and watched a family eat dinner until something inside her, something she had not had language for, simply moved. Then he put on his coat and went to meet her. That is where this story lives. Now, not in the board meeting, not in the Forbes profile, not in any of the places where the version of Diana Ashford that the world recognizes tends to live. It lives in a corner table at Meridian on a Tuesday evening in December, in the specific gravity of a man turning his phone face down and looking at his daughter like she's something he knows he's lucky to have. It lives in the moment a woman who had spent 14 years building things set down the instrument she used to keep appropriate distance and crossed a room towards something she didn't have a name for yet. It lives in what Ella said in the hallway, in a matter-of-fact precision of a child who has decided that complicated things don't need to be made more so. Diana Ashford has started walking to work in the mornings now. 20 minutes, no phone, no agenda. She says it's for her health. Those who know her understand it's for something harder to name. The 20 minutes that belong to no meeting, no memo, no carefully managed outcome. 20 minutes of being simply outside in weather, which she has decided she can learn to tolerate. Theo has strong opinions about Diana's restaurant choices. He has expressed these opinions clearly and at length, and she has listened with what he considers appropriate seriousness. She once let him pick the restaurant. He chose a place that had a crane game by the entrance and milkshakes in 3 flavors. Diana ordered the chocolate. Theo approved. Ella showed Diana her notebook in April. She sat on the table between them and stepped back, the way you step back from something you decided to trust. Diana read 3 pages without saying anything. Then she looked up and asked one question, precise, exactly right, and Ella looked at her the way she looks at things she has decided are worth her attention. Marcus built the second bookshelf with a level. It doesn't wobble. He is mildly disappointed about this, which he doesn't say out loud, but which Ella noticed and noted in the notebook, because she notices everything the way her mother did. The first bookshelf is still in the living room. The wobble is still there. They have decided to keep it. There's a thing that happened on a Tuesday evening at a restaurant in December, and no one who was there. Not the maitre d', not the server whose plates didn't fall, not the other tables doing their ordinary business in the ordinary light, would have recognized it for what it was. A woman set down her phone. A man turned his face down. A child said something precise and true. And the space between 2 separate lives, which had seemed fixed, which had seemed like the kind of distance you manage rather than close, turned out to be 3 blocks and a conversation and the willingness to be seen without your armor on. It was not a small thing. It never was. The right eyes were watching all along. They just needed someone to look up first. Understood. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. The people who stay for the whole story are the ones who understand it. If it moved you, the videos on your screen right now are waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come home. Quiet Kind has a story for you.